Hello everyone, Professor Krizluk here. So I wanted to make today's video about the media, the role the media plays in society with a focus more on democratic societies, the role that the media plays. We'll incorporate some from outside democracies, a bit from the role of the media in authoritarian regimes, but we'll see definitely maybe a little bit more of a focus on the US, probably what many of us are more familiar with if we grew up in the United States. So when we think of the role of the media, this is something that I'm sure many of us have thought about before. Like, what is the role of the media? Why does it matter if we have a thriving, strong media? We see a lot of discussion in the US right now about the decline of the media, about the decline of local newspapers. Many local communities, which used to have their own newspapers, don't anymore. Many of them have closed or shrank, or if they're still in existence, they might just run a lot of AP News, which is the same story from the same writer that would appear in a different newspaper down the road. This really came to the forefront after George Santos's election, where in New York, it wasn't until after his election that reporters started to dig into his past, that maybe some lies that he, or at least untruths that he had told, started to surface. And so people were frustrated. Why wasn't there a local media to tell the voters about this individual before they voted for him? So we hear a lot of criticism in the US about the media. People frustrated with Fox News, people frustrated with MSNBC, people frustrated with the New York Times, people frustrated with the Washington Post. So really daily, if you are on social media, if you're online, you'll see criticisms about the media. So let's just step back then and think about really what is the role of the media? What is it doing? Why is a strong and thriving media space important, and how has that changed over the past 20 years with the rise of social media, with the rise of online content creators? How has this changed? So at the basement level, when we think about why media is important, we can think of it that a free press is really important in a democracy because it plays this role as a watchdog, the media as a watchdog. So maybe you've heard in an American government course or in other videos, this idea of the media as the fourth estate. This term, popularized by Thomas Carlyle, implies the media acts as a check on government power. So if we think about a system like the US, where we have checks and balances, where we have one branch of government holding the other accountable, when we think about the media, that can be a separate check on government authority. And why it's essential for democracies is because it can investigate government wrongdoing. Maybe we've seen in the past quality journalism holding governments accountable because of investigative journalism. So it can hold the government accountable, and tied with that, but also separate, so kind of both, is that it informs the public. So we want to know what the government is doing. We want to know what our elected representatives are doing. We want to know what those in the bureaucracy are doing. So people have busy lives, and they're busy with their work and their family and just trying to survive. We don't have the time or the commitment or maybe even the interest to go sit through meetings in Washington, D.C. every day and see what our government officials are doing. We also don't have the capacity to be abroad and to be everywhere and to see what's going on in Israel or what's going on in Iran or what's going on in Ukraine. The media plays that role of informing us, telling us what is going on in Washington, telling us what's going on in Denver, telling us what's going on in our state capitals, telling us what's going on around the world. So it's holding government officials accountable, but it's also just informing us. It's allowing us to make better decisions in a democracy if we know what's going on. And so a lot of these criticisms that we hear about the media are that maybe the media is not doing their job, their responsibility to hold those in power accountable. Or maybe it's not informing citizens like it should be. Whether or not this is true, these are grievances and these are complaints, absolutely, that we hear. We hear in our public discourse. And so connected to those two is that the media helps create transparency and accountability from those in power. So this could be those in power in the government as well as those in power in our economic system. Holding accountable firms that maybe are polluting, or holding accountable firms who are doing things that citizens don't like. So we know there are some examples, some solid examples from history, from we can think of the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, where investigative journalism really played a role in holding those in power accountable. It doesn't mean smaller outlets can't do the same. So Watergate came out of the Washington Post, but we also see smaller outlets also doing journalism, holding those in power accountable, and certainly telling and informing citizens. So with the new age of media that we're in, we're seeing that these smaller outlets really matter too. So if you've been following protests in Los Angeles, so not even the nationwide protests, but just the ones concentrated in Los Angeles, there are many small outlets who are covering those protests. The Washington Post, New York Times are as well, but small outlets matter too. We know that communities are losing their newspapers, but taking their place is sometimes independent journalists. We see the rise of independent journalists. So when we think about what is the health of the media today, I keep talking about how there is this shrinking of the media. The business model that used to work for the media, selling ads in the newspaper or selling subscriptions, has really changed over the past decade, 2 decades. Today, it's so easy to get free news online that people are less willing to pay for it. That free news online might not be the same caliber. It might be good, but it might not be the same. It might not hire journalists to go to the field and do research. So it is a changing and complicated field for sure. So when we look at, as an example, even like press freedom, the U.S. ranks the 2020, I think 2022 report ranks the U.S. as the 44th most free and open media space. So not great. Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark were all at the top. The U.S. ranks 44th. And then when we think about why would the U.S. rank relatively low for a democracy? Some criticisms are concentration of ownership. That fewer and fewer businesses or fewer and fewer conglomerates own more and more newspapers. And we can think about maybe why that matters. 100 years ago, we would have been exposed to a pretty radical spectrum of views of thought, from the far left socialist to the far right. And there would be a lot in between. So you'd be able to find a wide variety of intellectual thought, bringing to a lot of different ideas to the reader. We see that far less today. Jeff Bezos is often criticized for his role with the Washington Post. The owner of the LA Times, similarly, is criticized for how they run their newspaper. This really came to the forefront with the Donald Trump and Kamala Harris election, where both owners of their respective newspapers kind of stepped in and told their newspaper, we're not endorsing anyone. And this caused a lot of backlash. Online, you saw people saying, oh, I'm canceling my Washington Post subscription. I'm canceling my LA Times subscription. So we see that there's absolutely this concentration of ownership of newspapers. Within the U.S., we also see a lot of attacks on the media from those in power, legal, verbal attacks on the media as a reason why Reporters Without Borders has said the U.S. media could absolutely be freer. Okay, so we know the role of the media. We know that it's to inform, to hold those in power accountable. Again, whether or not it's a government or a corporation, hold those in power accountable. So let's think for a couple minutes about how the media shapes reality. So we know the role of the media, hold those in power accountable. How does the media shape reality? One way is just what the media decides to cover. Some events are covered a lot, and then others really are just bypassed. So we see this with the protests going on across the country. The narrative and the image that the media creates absolutely shapes people's perception of what's going on in the world. So most political events, most events in our lives that we know about, we don't experience directly, but through news filters. What the news, what the journalist covers, and how they cover it. This shapes our views about what's important, what's not important, also what we know, what we're worried about. So the media plays a role in educating us, but it also shapes our views on what is important. And so we see certain topics heavily covered, often covered, that can shape people's perception. This oftentimes really comes to the forefront before elections. So if certain things are being covered a lot, well, then that shapes people's perceptions. There have been instances where certain news stories emerge right before the election, are covered a lot, and then seemingly disappear post-election. This shapes the viewer's idea of what matters and what is the world. So let's think for a minute about something that's called gatekeeping. That certain things are covered and then other things are not. And so that can be hard to bring new ideas, can be hard to bring opposing issues to the forefront. And this issue can be magnified if would be a better word, with a changing media landscape. So print media still plays a big role because of its depth of content. If you read a publication like The Economist, the British newspaper / journal, it gives quality depth of understanding of a world event. Other things, maybe if you're just watching a 60-second news clip on YouTube, you don't get that same depth. But many people watch and consume news on the internet. That doesn't maybe give that depth of content. But we live in a really changing media environment. When we think about how else we consume media. Radio is absolutely still there. Many of us, I'm sure, listen to NPR or PBS or the BBC, NPR or BBC, excuse me. So radio is still there, but not like it used to be. It was the first mass medium in U.S. political life. Today, maybe we don't consume as much as we once did. We see this backed up with data, but many of us still consume the radio, maybe in our cars, in the house when we're working. It still plays a role in shaping our understanding of the world. The television, though, absolutely is where we get a lot of our news. Of course, the internet is changing this massively, but many Americans still sit down in the evening and watch the evening news, or watch the local news, or watch the internet, the 24-hour news cycle. The emergence of the 24-hour news cycle certainly changed our consumption of news. Now stations are responsible and have to figure out what to talk about or put on for 24 hours a day. And so that absolutely changes how they cover material. So television still, especially for an older generation, still plays a role educating, telling people about what's going on in the world. The internet, of course, has really revolutionized how younger Americans, younger people around the world consume their news. A recent study that came out said about 80% of Americans get news online, many from social media. And this can be good. You're knocking down some of those gatekeepers. Anyone that wants to talk about the news and spread the news and inform people now can. Going back to our Los Angeles example, anyone can go down to a demonstration and record it and talk about it. Knocking down those gatekeepers that maybe existed in print media, excuse me, existed in television media. Now anyone can go be an independent journalist. And maybe that's a positive because, again, those gatekeepers are knocked down. We can all tell a story about what's going on. But we do know there has been an emergence of fake news, an emergence of conspiracy theories online, which the internet has allowed to spread and to really reach all corners of society. When fake news or misinformation is posted, it spreads rapidly. And that is a concern about the new form of media. If we're getting our news from TikTok or our news from YouTube or our news from Facebook, these untruths can spread very, very quickly. And so that is just something that we're finding out as a society how to deal with. What we also find ourselves with the internet and social media and really this just digital revolution is that we can find ourselves in echo chambers. So when we think about who we engage with online, they're probably people that have similar ideologies as us. Social media really promotes ideological silos. So we're even seeing this with where we get our news from what social media company. If you are probably more liberal, you'll find your way to Blue Sky. More conservative finds their way to Rumble or True Social. So we're creating silos for ourselves where we're always just being told that our views are correct. And our world, our way of looking at the world is reinforced by others around us because we're creating these ideological silos that don't really challenge our views of the world. So that can be kind of bad, especially when we start to see misinformation spread. And then we look at our social media and everyone's telling us we're right. Well, of course, we knew that was how this was. We knew that so-and-so did this. And so we really find ourselves easily just reinforcing our beliefs. So we're, again, as a society, figuring out, okay, how do we challenge ourselves to not just get into these silos and not just reinforce what we already believe. So one last thing, because I want to end on a more positive note, that social media has played a role in being positive. So we can think about the negative aspects of it, that we are siloed in our own around those that we believe, that with similar beliefs. But we also see that activism and empowerment has worked. For instance, in the Arab Spring, social media helped with mass mobilization. People were able to tell each other, we're going to meet at this time, at this location. So we've talked about autocracies before. In autocracies, the autocrat tries to clamp down on social media, because they know it is a great way for people to communicate, to talk about where the protest is going to occur. And so that has been a successful use of social media as a way to organize, as a way to tell each other, okay, this is where we're going to meet, and to help educate each other. Okay, these are the crimes that the regime is committing. Helps educate people. So that was really just a 30,000 foot level view of the role of the media in a democracy, with a little bit of autocracy thrown in there. So really, just to summarize, when we think of the role of the media, it's to hold those in power accountable, to educate, to inform the public. And we know that we are living through a changing media environment, where we've gone from print newspapers, print journals, to the radio, to the television, and then now to social media. Doesn't mean we've all switched from reading newspapers to social media. Many people still read newspapers. When I ask my students in person, how many of you subscribe to a newspaper, there's usually one person in the class who, if they either do or their parents do. So print media is still there. We transitioned. Maybe some of us still listen to the news on the radio. We listen to NPR. We listen to the BBC. Others, though, when I ask students, how many of you get news from social media, almost every hand goes up. So that is absolutely a way that we consume media today. And so if we're trying to hold those in power accountable, we want to inform the public, that is where we get our news from. But we do have to be careful that although it knocks down gatekeepers, and that's a good thing, that we don't just get into a silo of like-minded people, and that we don't just consume misinformation or disinformation or simply fake news. And that is a difficult thing, because we're humans. We don't like to necessarily be challenged. So that was just a quick overview of the media. If you did make it to the end, I thank you. Okay, have a nice day.